Hi folks, so welcome to week 8, and this week I'm going to be taking you through the evaluating sport and community development projects. Again, this is a section of your grant application, and I'm just going to be basically talking you through the sorts of things that you'll need to include within that section and why we've actually got it as part of the grant application. So again, just having a look at the unit objectives, this fits squarely into the final objective about being able to plan, implement and evaluate a community development programme aimed at working with an excluded group. So I'm hopefully going to help you to develop an understanding of what evaluation is, the sorts of methods you can use and how to think about evaluating what sort of impact your project would be having. Okay, so as mentioned, it's part of your grant application, and I'll need you within that to illustrate how you'd monitor and evaluate your project. So a handy starting point for this lecture is actually looking at what the difference is between monitoring and evaluation, whether you think they're the same thing or whether they're different, and also why is it important to include this within a project. Okay, so monitoring and evaluation are very specific types of research, and they're basically aimed at understanding the impact of particular interventions, policies and activities. So understanding what projects that we put in a community context, monitoring and evaluation helps us to understand what they actually do, what kind of value do they have within community or not value, as the case may be. So monitoring usually involves collecting of routine data that illustrates what's happening. So monitoring data could be things like the number of people that are participating every week, the number of regular participants you get. So you're getting 50 people to your session every week, but are they the same 50 people or are they different? It's basically just the sort of collection of usually basic numerical data. So how many people are taking part, how many people are coming to educational sessions, things like that. Evaluation is much more detailed, and that really is exploring the why of what is happening. So your monitoring data might collect information that 20 young people come along to your session, and at the end of your project, which is aiming to get unemployed people back into employment, 10 of those people are now back in employment. So that's helpful for giving us the core facts of your project, but it isn't very helpful for explaining why. So why have 10 people moved into employment? Why have 10 people not? And that's where evaluation really comes in, where you're wanting to know the why. So within evaluation, you're looking at that process illustrated along the bottom. You're looking at what's happened, how many people there are, how has that happened, and why has that happened. And those last two, the how and the why, are really attached to evaluation research. So why is evaluation important? In a most practical sense, it's vitally important to funders, because if they're going to give you money, they want to know that it's been well spent. They want to see what impact it's had. At a broader level, for those of us working in the sport and physical activity field, excuse me, it's been a long day, excuse me. That's blown me away. Right, start again. Those of us that are working in the sport and activity field, or even within physical education, it can help us assemble a case for the value of sport or physical activity. So to generate more money, to raise the significance of what we do, it's helpful to have evaluation data. From a sort of project management perspective, it's important for understanding why change does or doesn't occur. So we might not be getting any change whatsoever in the young people that are participating in our project, but we don't really know why. And once we have that knowledge, we might be able to make changes to the project that make sure that it's better in the future. So just in line with that, another key reason why we undertake evaluation work is to inform future policy and practice, to build on our mistakes, to learn from what we're doing wrong, to learn what we're doing right, and to develop better projects from that in the future. And there is a real strong advocacy at the moment within Sport for Development work on developing good, robust monitoring and evaluation information about Sport for Development programs to better understand what they do and how they do it. So monitoring and evaluation is really looking at filling the gap in knowledge. So if I take a research project I'm involved in at the moment, and that's one that's looking at HIV and AIDS education delivered through sport within Zambia. And part of the impacts of this project have been raising young people's self-esteem and lowering their risk and lowering their incidences of at-risk behaviour, and we found out that some of the impacts of their involvement in the project. But what we don't really get is that middle bit. How is that happening? Why is it happening? So why is our project having those particular impacts? And evaluation helps us look at that gap and understand that. There's inherent problems with the process of monitoring and evaluation. Within Sport for Development work, there's very limited funding to undertake it, which can mean that we can't really get the sort of robust, detailed data we want. Monitoring and evaluation is often done internally by project staff, who obviously their continued employment, it depends on them demonstrating that they've done a good job, so it can often lack objectiveness and rigour. It's often methodologically poor, so often a real sort of reliance on using questionnaires and poorly constructed questionnaires and statistical information, and you don't really get a whole heap of information on the experiences of people that have been involved in the projects. It's often not completed in a timely manner, so often it's completed way into the end of the project, where you haven't got the opportunity to collect baseline data to really see what the transitions are by participants on the project. Even when it is done and has been done well, it can be ignored in future policy directions. I did a lot of this work in the UK, working as an evaluator on government funded projects, and generally the reports I wrote weren't really looked at all. They just became documents that sat on a shelf. So even when you do have that good data there and available, governments in particular tend to just do what they want to do. They don't really look at the previous evidence to see how they can improve what they're doing. So it can be quite frustrating, but as we've indicated, it's a really important process of developing good projects, having this sort of robust research around it. Okay, so monitoring and evaluation theory, and we're going back to our favourite thing, the logic model. Again, hopefully this should emphasise the importance to you of developing this for your own project and doing it well. So we have our project logic model, and we have our short, medium and long-term aims, and this is really where monitoring and evaluation comes in. So it fits in. We're basically looking at the what we're wanting to do and trying to understand how it leads to these short, medium and long-term aims. So how has that happened? So as a monitor or evaluator, we want to assess whether we've got young people involved in sessions, how we've done that to assess our short-term aims. We're wanting to look at whether young people have increased their self-confidence, their self-esteem and leadership skills, and if they have, how has that happened? If they haven't, why has it not happened? Then we want to see, for our medium-term aims, we want to assess within our evaluation whether young people are making those positive changes to their behaviour, and if they are, again, what's influenced that? Are they reducing alcohol, drug intake? Or if they're not, why are they not? What's sort of happening in that process? And then finally, we want to look at whether we have improved communities, collect data on that, collect data on long-term data on instances of antisocial behaviour, substance abuse, and then collect data on whether we have created cohesive and supportive communities. So your entire evaluation should be based around measuring all of those aims that you have. So in your section on your grant application, I'm looking to see how are you going to evaluate your short-term aims, how are you going to evaluate your medium-term aims, and how are you going to evaluate your longer-term aims. What sort of research do you need to do to get information on all of those? Who do you need to speak to? What sort of data do you need to collect? So if we're looking at research methods, which is how we'd actually collect that monitoring evaluation data, there are numerous methods that we could use. So if we go back to our logic model, so the involvement of young people regularly in sessions, that's quite a simple thing to develop. So with that, we probably just want to keep registers every week of the sessions, registers of young people's names, so we can track who's coming when and how often. Things like the development of self-confidence, self-esteem, we might want to measure those using a questionnaire, and we might collect data before participants start on the project, during the project, and after the project. Now that would give us a good indication of how self-esteem and self-confidence has increased. We could have a sort of scale that they mark on, but that might not necessarily tell us why their self-confidence has increased. So we might need another research method to actually look at how we understand that. We might need to do some interviews with the young people during the project and after the project and talk to them about their self-confidence. How has it increased? What specific aspects of the project have helped you increase your confidence? Equally, if the reverse has happened and they haven't become more confident, we need to sit and speak with them about that. So for each of these sections, you're looking at what do you want to measure, how are you going to measure it, what sort of research methods are going to be the most appropriate, and how often are you going to implement those research methods. So I've mentioned that you might want to think about baseline data, you might want to think about doing some evaluation during the actual project, and you might want to think about it at the end. So this section's really got to convey all of that. It needs to be very tight, very tightly aligned to your logic model and all these different aims that you want to emerge as a result of your project. So for every key aim, I want to see how you evaluate that that key aim has happened. Who do you need to speak to do that? So just to sort of summarise that, as I said, produce the logic model for your own project, consider each outcome, and you might want to just sort of sketch it on your own logic model. How are you going to measure this? Think about a mixed method approach. Are there different sort of existing databases you might be able to draw on to help you provide an indication of your impact? So again, if we're looking at things like improved communities with reduction in youth antisocial behaviour and substance abuse, could we have a look at existing crime statistics on youth engagement in antisocial behaviour? Could we look at them before the project? Could we look at them during? And could we keep looking at them after and see in relation to the area that we're working in, are those statistics changing? Are they going down? From that, we couldn't infer that, say, if there was reductions, that they come solely from our project, but it would give us some very useful data to suggest that our project is potentially having an impact in this area. Things like the creation of cohesive, supportive communities. There's mass surveys done now on things like social capital within communities and trust and feelings of safety within communities. Could you get that sort of data for the area that you're working in and actually use that to illustrate what you want to do? So with your methods, really think about, who do you need to speak to? Do you need to speak to coaches? Do you need to speak to participants? Do you need to speak to parents? Do you need to speak to sort of service agencies? Could you do some survey work? And what existing data might exist about the communities that you're working with that could help you illustrate the types of impacts your project's having? With everything that you're sort of suggesting in your monitoring evaluation, think very clearly about what exactly it is you're trying to find out, and then from that, what's the best way to do it. Within your evaluation section, you really need to think, is there going to be any issues of gaining information from the types of participants that you're targeting? So if your project's working with people with disabilities, we say severe learning disabilities, you might have problems actually getting interview data from them. They might not be verbally competent. You might have sort of problematic issues speaking with them. If your project's working with newly arrived communities, there might be language issues. How might you overcome that? And so if you're working in Indigenous communities, there could be a real suspicion of external researchers coming in. So within your grant application, if this is relevant, I really want you to consider those types of issues, highlight those issues, and also suggest how you might come around them if possible. There's different types of ways to do evaluation. So you can do this sort of researcher comes in type approach, which you might advocate within your grant application. But you can also have the more action research approach, which actually embeds the evaluation within the process and has participants undertaking the research themselves as part of the process. So we've been using this approach within a youth action school project we're currently running, where young people are critiquing their own environments and how they support or hinder physical activity involvement. And on this issue, they've been interviewing each other, they've been interviewing their teachers, their parents, and keeping journals of their experiences. So all of this can contribute to evaluation evidence. So within your own project, is there any way that participants might be able to collect some data as well, and embed that as part of your evaluation, or are you going to keep it completely external? Okay, so just to sort of try and summarise and bring that together, hopefully that should give you a starting point for developing your own evaluation framework. On Moodle, I've put some examples of existing evaluation reports. They're quite handy for giving you examples of research methods and how other people have gone about doing evaluations. So they could also be useful for you for justifying the approach that you're using if it's been used previously on another project. So as I said, monitoring evaluation is incredibly important within sport and community development work. But to do a good evaluation, you really need very clearly defined aims and intended outcomes. Without those, your evaluation is going to be rubbish because you don't really know what you're evaluating. Once you've got your intended outcomes, then you need to develop a robust framework to work out what specifically you want to measure. Consider the research methods, what methods are going to be most effective for collecting the information you need, and how are you going to use them, at what point in the project are you going to use them to collect information that's giving you the best picture possible of what's actually happening. And then within that section, just consider, as I've mentioned, any issues with communication. Is there going to be any problems with connecting the type of data that you want to make your case? And if there is, make sure you specify that within that section. Okay, so we've got no classes for placement in week 9, and then we'll be back in week 10, where I'm going to talk through coaching and coaching theory and do some tutorials based around that, which are all focused on helping you with your final assignment for this unit that will be delivered in weeks 11 and 12. So look forward to catching up with you all then.